Hi, I'm David Gregg, the director of the Rhode Island Natural History Survey, and today I'm at the State House distributing the new State of the Pollinators report from the Plant Insect Community Network. The Plant Insect Community Network is a project of the Rhode Island Natural History Survey, and you can learn more about it and read the report for yourself at picn.rinhs.org. I'm also here to tell you that you're watching the recording of the January meeting of the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership. Today's focal presentation is by David Morales and Haley Essington from the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council. They're going to be talking about community resilience along the Woonasquatucket River Greenway. If you're interested in learning more about woods that are in cities or their effect on communities or the community's effect on the woods, you're going to like this presentation. The Rhode Island Natural History Survey presents videos to showcase the animals, plants, geology, and natural systems that surround us, and the people and organizations working to understand and conserve them.
Welcome to the January 2025 Rhode Island Woodland Partnership meeting. Today we're joined by David Morales and Haley Essington of the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council. We're going to talk about their work on community resilience along the Greenway. I think we have a group of people, as we often do, who haven't all met each other before. We just go around and do a quick round of introductions. You can, hand it off to somebody who hasn't gone yet, whether you know them or not. But I'll start. Christopher Riley with URI's Department of Natural Resources in Sweet Birch Consulting, and I'm the co-coordinator of the Woodland Partnership. I'll hand it off to Kate.
Hey everybody, Kate Sales, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Land Trust Council, and also the other co-coordinator of the Woodland Partnership. I'm gonna pass it to Beth Banner.
Everyone, I'm Beth Banner. I'm there's my face again. I'm the Urban Forestry Specialist with the Department of Environmental Management here in Rhode Island, and I will pass it to Paul Dolan.
Paul Dolan, Executive Director of Rhode Island RC&D Council. Fern Graves.
Fern Graves, a Forest Stewardship Program Coordinator with RIDEM. Bob Verrier.
Hey, Bob Verrier, President of Rhode Island Wood Operators, President of Verrier Tree Service, member of RIFCO, and member of the American Loggers Council. Let me see. Well, it's Paul Rosselli.
Thank you, Bob. Paul Rosselli, President of the All Volunteer Private Land Trust in the Northwest Territories of Rhode Island, also known as Burrowville. We are not connected with town government. And I'll pass it off to Sam.
Hi, everyone. I am Sam Turner, and I'm the Land Conservation Program Coordinator for the Northern Rhode Island Conservation District. I will pass it to John. I don't think you've gone yet.
Hello, this is John Mitchell. Driving right now, so I'll be quiet. Other than this, I am the Stewardship Coordinator for the Narragansett Bay Research Reserve, located on Prudence Island, managing about 2,200 acres upland. That includes a lot of woods. And I'll say now, in case I missed the updates later, we had a good prescribed burn last week, and we hope for another one this week in some Hope Woodlands.
Well, David and Haley, want to introduce yourselves and tell us about your work and roles.
Sure. Nice to meet you all. My name is Haley Essington. I'm the Community Resilience Liaison at the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council.
And good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Morales, he, him, and I serve as the Director of Community Programs with the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council. And we're very excited for today's presentation, so we want to thank Chris again for the kind invitation.
Glad to have you here. So we'll have some time at the end for discussion, Q&A, reflection, and so forth. But you guys can take it away, and we'll be here.
Perfect. All right. Let me share my screen here. Hello. Nope. Okay. Give it 1 second. All right. Can everyone see my presentation? Okay.
Looks great.
All right.
Perfect.
Awesome.
So today we're excited again to be able to discuss some of our efforts around community resilience throughout the Woonasquatucket River Greenway, specifically through the efforts of our community programs department. Now, some of you may be familiar with the work of the Woonasquatucket River. We have different segments of work that we focus on, from our river ranger team that help preserve and maintain our river, to our recreation team that help out with canoes, our bicycle program. And then a lot of this ties back towards the work that we do on a day-to-day basis through community programs. So we're going to talk about some of our programs in further detail and the ways that we are engaging residents to be empowered as a part of this work.
All right. So if you are unfamiliar with our organization, our mission is to create positive environmental, social, and economic change by revitalizing the Woonasquatucket River, its greenway, and its communities. So we're going to take a bit of a closer look at the different communities that lie within the Woonasquatucket River Watershed. So our headwaters are up in North Smithfield, and then it flows down through Smithfield, Gloucester, North Providence, Johnston, and then down here in Providence. And so I think something really important to note is kind of the difference in the amount of developed area that we can see on this map. So of course, our watershed includes areas like Smithfield that are more forested. But then as we follow the river down into Providence, we can see that it's obviously a lot more developed. And so our urban forest is going to look a little bit different. But that's kind of why we started our community programs in the first place, to kind of address some of these disparities in green space. And yeah, so there's about 280,000 people that live within our watershed, which is about 27% of the state. But like I said, we're gonna talk today about our community programs that are specifically focused down here in Providence in neighborhoods like Olneyville, Manton Valley, etc. So if this is a map of our greenway, if you've never explored the Woonasquatucket River Greenway, I highly recommend. It's a great urban bike path. So we have kind of a mixture of on and off-road segments on our greenway, starting down on Promenade on Kinsley Ave, right by Providence Place Mall. And then our off-road portion of the greenway starts at Riverside Park and goes all the way up to Lyman Ave in Johnston. And so our work as the community programs department is to kind of engage the communities that live along the greenway. And this makes us kind of a unique organization because we're not just a greenway organization. We kind of leverage our work in expanding the greenway to do green infrastructure projects and implement habitat and water quality improvements along the way. And in doing so, engage our neighbors to make sure that we have good stewards of the land and its resources. So yeah, that's a little bit about who we are. And then now we're going to talk about our Olneyville specific programming that we have.
So as noted earlier by Haley, a lot of the work that we do within community programs happens specifically within Providence, but particularly the neighborhood of Olneyville, which is located within the lower watershed of the Woonasquatucket River. And for those of you who are familiar with Olneyville, you will know that Olneyville is a relatively diverse community where we have neighbors that come from such diverse backgrounds. I mean, just making a drive through Olneyville Square, you will see that it is dominated by bodegas that have representation from various countries across Latin America, all the way to the world famous Atlantic Mills Flea Market. So that being said, we recognize that for many of our residents in Olneyville, aside from English, one of the most commonly spoken languages is Spanish. Keeping into the context that, again, many of the neighbors who call Olneyville home immigrated, whether it's from Central or Latin America. And that is important context to note as we talk a little deeper about some of our programming efforts. But sticking back to Olneyville, one thing that we have always been very conscientious of is the impact of environmental issues based on Olneyville's lack thereof green infrastructure. A lot of this is tied back to the excessive flooding and stormwater runoff that we see across Olneyville, tracing all the way back to 2010 and before, where we have had excessive flooding that happens between some of the neighborhoods within Olneyville all the way across Valley. As noted, there was a situation just last year on January 10th where the flooding got so excessive that neighbors felt the need to essentially create homemade canoes and be able to make a trip right down Atwells Avenue. And a lot of this is a reflection of the investments or lack thereof that have come from local, state, and federal governments. And that was one of the main focal points as to why the organization decided to further integrate the community programs department into focusing on a program such as Nuevas Voces, which we're excited to introduce and discuss in further detail. So just about 4.5 years ago, we launched the first ever Nuevas Voces cohort. And as noted here, Nuevas Voces is a 10-month community leadership program that is done through bilingual facilitation with the ultimate goal of trying to ensure that as many neighbors and residents within the lower watershed have an opportunity to feel engaged on topics that they may otherwise not be exposed to. And this includes local history between the neighborhood, the Woonasquatucket River, understanding civic engagement on the basis of local and state government, the background of environmental science, and having a basic understanding of the causes of climate change, in addition to the solutions that exist around climate resiliency, all tying back towards an emphasis on cultural awareness and racial justice. And this is achieved through monthly classes and site visits. And we are now in our 4th cohort today, and we're excited to have a cohort of 22 students, again, most of whom are predominantly Spanish speakers, reside within Olneyville, and have shared with us over the last several months that this is information that they would have never been exposed to had it not been for Nuevas Voces. And for us, the engagement piece is so important because it's only through a commitment of 10 months that we'll really be able to see our neighbors develop into environmental leaders. And in order to sustain this level of engagement and be able to produce the success of having leaders in our backyards, we have a very intentional model on the way we engage and facilitate classes, but also the structure that students are exposed to. The first of which is a stipend compensation that we provide to our students. We recognize that for a lot of our students, they come from very diverse backgrounds, not necessarily just in terms of where they grew up, but also in terms of age and responsibilities. We have had some participants that are as young as 19 years old and have recently immigrated to the United States. And then we have some of our cohort members that are in their mid-40s and have called Providence home for the last 15 years and have grown up having an entire family here. So all that to say is we recognize that all of our participants have a shared set of responsibilities outside of our program. And for that reason, we want to compensate and honor their time. Hence why we have a stipend that's roughly $25 an hour. For context, our classes are 2 hours at a time. So you're looking at roughly $50 per class. But a big piece of this as well is understanding that information is only accessible as long as we make it accessible. And for that reason, we have all of our classes that are facilitated directly in Spanish. And the way each one of our classes works, which we'll get into further detail, is we bring in guest speakers, those who have expertise around the different levels of environmental science and climate justice. For those who are in the field that do not necessarily speak Spanish, that is where we empower our co-facilitators who are able to provide direct translation and interpretation. And I want to give a special shout out to Haley here, who actually studied Spanish in college and is very fluent and has done an incredible job each and every single course being able to provide this support over the last 2 cohorts. Similarly, I made a reference to the fact that we have parents in the class. Because to be quite honest, we have a lot of folks who are, again, have responsibilities outside of the classroom, that being having young children ranging from some as young as 3 years old to 10-year-olds to teenagers. And we're excited to be able to offer childcare each class because that ensures that they feel a level of comfort not having to rearrange their schedule to be able to be a part of this program. As noted as well, aside from just being able to have our monthly classes, we also incorporate site visits, which we'll talk a little more about in terms of how we expose our students to green infrastructure directly. And for site visits, in order to ensure that there's as much accessibility as possible, that is where our program steps up to provide direct transportation. And it helps that, again, we live in a relatively dense neighborhood within Olneyville, Providence. So you pick up one student, you only got to drive 2 minutes out to pick up the next student. So we have a consistent model in place that works out with the transportation. But one thing I've been incredibly proud of is that each and every single cohort, I believe that the curriculum and the syllabus and the schedule that we put out is more and more intentional because of our efforts to solicit feedback. What is it that is resonating with the students? What are the topics in which they want us to focus more on? And so for this cohort in particular, we only gave them half of the syllabus when we kicked off class this year. We only told them this is what you're going to learn between September through December. And then for January through May, we're going to develop the curriculum based on some of the feedback that y'all have shared. And so that is what we've been able to administer at this time. And again, it helps out a lot for us to just be able to maintain a consistent schedule. And so our students recognize that 6 p.m. on the first Wednesday of every month, they're going to see us at the Olneyville Resilience Hub, which is located in the Olneyville neighborhood. And it provides that familiarity of consistent scheduling. Our site visits happen on the weekends and they do differ throughout the month. So that is something where we try to give them the notice as soon as possible as to when we'll be hosting. And then lastly, we believe very strongly about lived experience. Lived experience and opportunity, which is why our two main co-facilitators, who you see right on the screen between our co-facilitators, Maria Jose and Saida, they are both alumni of the program. And they now have the pleasure of being able to help us navigate the curriculum, be able to navigate the facilitation. And right here, as noted in this photo, you get to see them in action. And I wanted to take some time to talk about our model because it's important to understand this background information than to just assume that if you build it, they will come. That theory has proven to be flawed in the past. It's more than just hosting a program and getting the curriculum out there. It's about making sure that you meet your participants where they are. And that's something we've been able to successfully do over the last 4 cohorts. Now, I'll talk specifically about what our classes actually involve and what is the information that our participants are walking out with. We have a very intentional curriculum that focuses on prehistoric context between the Woonasquatucket River, between the neighborhood of Olneyville, and being able to further understand why is it that our river is contaminated? Why can you not swim within the Woonasquatucket River? There are cases of, again, environmental injustices that have happened, and it's important for our students to have that context, especially when one of our goals is to make sure that we expose them to the river and that they have an opportunity to actually visit Riverside Park. And as you'll note, one thing that we're very strategic about within our coursework is we try to pair up the classes with the most relevant site visit that can follow. So when we talked about the history of the Woonasquatucket River, we presented on a watershed model. We made sure that the following month, our site visit was going to Riverside Park. That way we can make that connection and we talk to our students about, hey, remember those mills we talked about that contaminate our river? This is the product of it. But also, these are the revitalization efforts that are actively happening. And these are also efforts that you yourself can be a part of advocating for. And of course, aside from just local context, it's important to understand the grander context at scale, which is our climate crisis. So we're very intentional about working with the Department of Environmental Management, in addition to other state agencies, to be able to get some of their leveled experts to come into our classroom, have a conversation around an introduction to climate change, how it impacts us on a day-to-day basis, and then dive a little deeper around the different segments of climate change. For example, we've had a class this year in collaboration with Brown University around air pollution and how air quality is monitored in Providence and the different disparities that exist. So all of this ties back towards the larger picture of having historic context, understanding the science, but most importantly, combining all of these strengths in order to be a firm advocate for your neighborhood, for your backyard, which is why we incorporate an overview of local and state government. One of our classes centers around how do local ordinances get passed within the city of Providence? And then vice versa, how does legislation move through the state house? For some of you who may or may not know, outside of my work with the Woonasquatucket River, I myself serve as a state representative. So it's been a very smooth transition to be able to explain to a lot of our participants firsthand exactly how legislation moves through the House and the Senate, while also being able to give the further context of how they can use their voices to advocate during these conversations. And a little further along the way, we will show you actual photos and content of what this looks like in action between classes and our site visits. First of which is the first class that we had for this year's cohort, which was centered around the history of the Woonasquatucket River, followed by a watershed model presentation that Haley can speak more about.
Yeah, so this is kind of a core element of our Nuevos Voces curriculum. As David said, we start with an explanation of what is the Woonasquatucket River Watershed. We talk a little bit about the definition of a watershed, and then we also dive into the history of the Woonasquatucket River. We talk about its history of industrial contamination, as well as some of the non-point source pollution that happens due to stormwater runoff in a city like Providence. And we have this great watershed model that we use, and it's also a great tool of our environmental education team that shows exactly where different sources of pollution are coming from in our city, whether that's from cars on our streets, whether that's from trash that's being thrown, animals, factories, things like that. And then we show visually how when it rains in a city, all of that runoff is carried into our water body, which is the Woonasquatucket River. And so it's a great visual representation, not only of how the pollution enters the river, but then we have a great discussion about what are some actionable steps we can take to avoid that pollution. And one of those being a discussion about how planting more trees, creating more green spaces, and removing pavement can be a great way to reduce the amount of pollution that's entering our river.
And the beauty of being able to have visual presentations like this is recognizing that for many of our students who haven't been in a quote unquote traditional classroom in a while, these are one of the key ways that we ensure that specific terminology, phrases stick with our participants. Because Haley had named some of the causes between the stormwater runoff. We're going to use the term stormwater runoff throughout our Nuevas Voces curriculum over the next several months. And so for many of our students, it becomes a trigger to be able to associate that term with the visual demonstration that Haley was able to provide. That way, when we're having those discussions with issue matter experts, a lot of our students are able to just plug in right away and be able to say, I recognize what that term means. I've been able to see it in action through a mock display. Similarly, we had talked earlier about some of our efforts of tying classes back towards site visits. So earlier in this cohort in particular, we had an opportunity to collaborate with the Breathe Providence initiative that comes out of Brown University, where they were able to discuss with our students the different types of air quality that exist in Providence. And as we know, it's the unfortunate reality that not all the air we breathe in Providence is at the same level of quality in one neighborhood to the other, or zip code by zip code. And a lot of that has to do with industrial development, with the decisions or lack thereof made by local and state governments, such as the Port of Providence. And for our students to be able to visualize that directly and see what is that impact, for a lot of them, it was something that they always were aware of in the back of their minds, recognizing that there were disparities, but to be able to see the data firsthand, I think went a lot further for them to feel motivated to say, I want to be a part of a difference to ensure that my child has the same quality of air as a child out in Barrington or another part of our state where they may not face the same level of contamination. And similarly, we tied this back over to a workshop that we did right here at Brown University's Office of Sustainability. We were able to build out air filters that were doing it yourself through a DIY construction that participants were then able to keep thereafter. So it's something we were really excited to do because it was hands-on, but beyond that, it was a tool that we had discussed during classes, how to keep yourself safe. So it wasn't just for the purposes of being able to have our students do a craft project and go home with it. It was a project that served the purpose of recognizing, I know why this tool is important and why I need to have something like this in my household, but also why I want to feel empowered to advocate for my neighbors to also have access to these resources. We've discussed a lot about advocacy because ultimately one of our goals is that our students are going to develop into community leaders, and that can take many ways, shapes, or forms. One of which we believe is the opportunity to be able to have the confidence to be a direct advocate, whether it's the chambers of City Hall or at the State House or through a city commissioner board. So we've been able to welcome some special guests such as Councilman Oscar Vargas, in this case, Councilman Miguel Sanchez, who was able to come before our class and really have these discussions in further detail as to what are some of the environmental issues that are being discussed at the city level and how some of our students can provide further ideas as to how they can improve a sustainability plan when it's being implemented. This is one of our other site visits that was done over at Riverside Park, which is really exciting because this served as the first opportunity for a lot of our participants to see green infrastructure firsthand. They were exposed to the rain garden that exists at Riverside Park, where we explained to them how this ensured that the stormwater runoff didn't hit into our communities, but instead was able to be sustained. And for a lot of this information that we were able to share at the site visit, it tied back to what we had talked about in class. But the difference here, as we had talked about earlier, was the visual difference that our students had an exposure to. And that was being able to see the river garden and the rain garden firsthand. So we've talked a lot about how we go about our curriculum, the level of intention that we have when it comes to selecting site visits. So we're exposing students to different parts of Providence, but also to existing infrastructure. So I want to talk a little more as to how we measure success as we head into graduation, because we are a 10-month cohort, and it's really during that 6th, 7th month that we as staff members, co-facilitators, are actively looking to ensure that students, A, understand the impacts of climate change at the local level, from flooding, being able to make that connection of what we discussed earlier as to what occurs in Olneyville when it comes to excessive flooding, water and air pollution based on the quality that differs zip code by zip code in Providence, and some of the heat waves that we've had to unfortunately experience. If our students can start to tie a lot of this back to the sciences of climate change, which they actively do when they participate in class and we hear it firsthand, or we see it through their homework assignments, which we provide every month, that demonstrates to us that we're getting to that goal of them feeling knowledgeable in that area of environmental science. Similarly, we want to ensure that throughout this program that our neighbors, our participants feel pride in having a neighborhood directly adjacent to the Woonasquatucket River, and that they recognize the historic context of Olneyville and the riverfront communities. And then beyond that is being able to have that level of confidence for each of our participants to speak out in public, to communicate with officials, to communicate with stakeholders, to communicate with issue matter experts in their native language. While we are not an ESL class in any way, shape, or form, or an English class, we want to make sure that we are sticking to the level of comfort that our students have, which is being able to be advocates, whether it's in Spanish, whether it's in Portuguese, whether it's in English. Our goal is just to ensure that our students recognize that they have a voice, especially when we're talking about issues related to climate resiliency. So that ties back to not only just direct communication, but being able to build out networks. So every year, one class that we facilitate specifically around is having a resource fair, where we bring together different community organizations to talk about opportunities for some of our upcoming graduates to join boards, to become volunteers, or even seek out employment. And a little later in this presentation, we'll talk to you specifically about some of the successes that we have had with alumni being able to find placements after graduation. And this is just one of the shots that we had from one of our State House visits. This was during a very interesting debate that we had around trying to ensure that we had access to more robust and free public transportation when it came to trying to reduce our carbon levels at the state level. And again, students had an opportunity to have an understanding of what the State House chamber looks like, be able to participate in what a mock debate consists of, but most importantly, be able to use the concepts that they learned in class as a means of feeling confident to stand up and advocate. This was another very proud moment that we had with one of our current cohort members. So as a part of being able to fund our stipends, we received generous grants from multiple sources, such as the United Way's Providence Equity Grant, in addition to one of our larger grants, which is known as SNEP-SOAR through the Environmental Protection Agency. During this press conference that featured our federal delegation between Congressman Magaziner, Congressman Amo, and some of our senators, we were also invited to be able to speak. And we were very proud that when we made the call out to students, if anyone would feel comfortable just being able to get on the podium and be able to speak around what they have learned around climate resiliency and how they're becoming leaders in their community, we had one of our very own students, Beatrice, who happily volunteered and was able to go up on to the podium and demonstrate how she has grown over the last several months and looks forward to continue making an impact in the greater Providence community following the program. Right here, we have a quote from one of our co-facilitators, Maria Jose Gutierrez, who is an alumni of Nuevas Voces going all the way back to 2020. So she was part of the initial cohort and has supported us over the last 3 cohorts. And I think this is a very important piece to emphasize, just recognizing again that many of our students come from diverse and immigrant backgrounds. So as Maria stated, our program makes people pay attention to all of these natural phenomenons and teaches them that they can be resilient to climate change. And I am proud to be a part of this organization because we have broken the language barrier and created the bond between Americans and the residents who, regardless of their immigration status, are members of this community and have a right to be an active part of it. So that really spoke volume because for a lot of our participants, they will share without hesitation that Nuevas Voces was the first time that they felt exposed to community, that they felt connected to community since arriving to the US. And keep in mind, these are folks who have lived in the US for over 2 decades. Like, we're not just talking about quote unquote newly arrived immigrants. We're talking about folks who have called Providence home for years and decades at a time, but never necessarily felt connected to their community. And to go a step further and just be able to create this community on the basis of environmental justice for us was something that was very special, especially when we are able to expose our students to environments that they otherwise wouldn't have had a chance to visit because they didn't feel comfortable entering those spaces. And that's why I want to show this photo of us being at the State House. Because when we took an unofficial poll to ask our participants that day, how many of you have ever been to the State House before? About no hands went up. And when we asked on the flip side, for how many of you is it your first time coming to the State House, we saw almost every hand go up. And this is a photo from one of our graduations from last year. And again, what you see before you are examples of 2 alumni that have done incredible work since graduating from our program. One of whom is now deeply connected with the Coalition for a Multilingual Rhode Island, where she serves as their communications director, being Cindy Miranda on the bottom right-hand corner. And then we have one of our other alumni, Santa, who is a part of the governing body of the Olneyville Resilience Hub, which Haley will talk about a little later. So all this ties back to, again, our goal is to ensure that after these 10 months, our participants are walking away with a stronger grasp of environmental justice. They can identify and advocate for green infrastructure investments across the city. And beyond that, be able to build social connections. So I'm excited now to shift over and talk a little more about one of our other community programs that has served as a sequel to Nuevas Voces, that being our Climate Champions program.
Yeah, so as David mentioned, we're now in our 4th cohort of Nuevas Voces, and after several years, the program has really grown so much through word of mouth through the community, and we found that after graduation, our participants are really wanting ways to keeping involved in their community. And so in response to that, we've developed kind of a second level 2-year-long cohort called Campeones del Combate Climático, which translates to Climate Champions. And this program is a really exciting one because it kind of serves to bridge a major communication gap between experts in stormwater issues and natural infrastructure and those with lived experiences from environmental injustices and contamination. So we recruited a small cohort who are Olneyville residents, and we brought together these residents with WRWC's engineers and stormwater specialists, as well as a lot of other stormwater experts throughout the state. So we've worked directly with city engineers, we've worked with the Narragansett Bay Commission and Groundwork Rhode Island, among many other excellent partners. And it's been really special to see the kind of knowledge exchange between the participants and the presenters. So the participants have learned a lot about green infrastructure, natural infrastructure, and ways to cite and implement it in their communities. And on the flip side, a lot of the experts on stormwater have been really grateful to have kind of real, hands-on experience and firsthand stories, because even our own stormwater experts here at the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council don't always have eyes on the different parts of our neighborhoods that are experiencing flooding. And so we've been able to learn a lot from them and use that knowledge to determine our priorities when selecting natural infrastructure projects along our greenway. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do in this program and some of the results. So starting off in this program, we brought in Groundwork Rhode Island to do a Stormwater 101 training, which was really great. We did 4 consecutive weeks throughout the summer, and we did it in partnership with our River Rangers, who is our team that continually maintains and stewards our greenway, as well as its adjacent natural infrastructure projects. And so everybody was kind of learning at the same time about the best practices in citing, implementing, and maintaining green infrastructure. We learned about how to determine soil type. We learned how to determine what plants are good for different types of rain gardens. And this really stuck with our participants, particularly a training from URI's Master Gardener program about invasive versus native plants. Something that really stuck with me is how much the participants enjoyed learning about native plants in an area that they might have recently immigrated to. A lot of them expressed that they didn't know that there was a difference between what is native, what is harmful, and a lot of them especially just express a lot of concern for the lack of trees, the lack of green spaces in their communities, especially as people who might have grown up in different countries in more rural agricultural areas that are accustomed to having land to grow their own food, to grow trees that provide all of the benefits that we know that trees provide. And so hearing that firsthand experience was really impactful to me. And then also similarly, they learned a lot about best practices in choosing plants and the different types of trees that can be beneficial in their own neighborhoods. So that was really special. This is a great example of the type of project that the Watershed Council is working on in conjunction with community members. As I said, as we work to expand our greenway, we kind of leverage that existing work to develop habitat, water quality improvements along the way, implement green infrastructure. And this was a great example of working with community members who have firsthand experiences and are able to identify some of the more problematic sites in their neighborhoods. So this photo is taken at DeSoto Street in Providence, which is right next to the Gotham Greens building. So the Watershed Council worked to develop an off-road section of our greenway right along DeSoto Street by Gotham Greens. And in doing so, we noticed a kind of a problematic area where a lot of erosion was occurring. And this was also identified in conjunction with Gloria Morales, who's one of our Campeones cohort members, a graduate of Nuevas Voces, who used to live on this street, and she identified that it was a problematic area that experienced flooding, that there was a lot of standing water after a rain event had occurred. So with this knowledge, we were able to work with engineers to develop some stormwater mitigation and water quality improvement measures on the site. And so this is a photo of us at that site with our Campeones members, and then also with the engineers from Stantec who are working to develop this project. So we're creating kind of a co-governance model in which residents are able to provide feedback directly to the people designing these types of projects and express what types of projects they would like to see in their neighborhoods, and how it will provide benefits to the neighbors. And these campeones are now able to communicate really clearly the benefits of green infrastructure within their community. So this was a solution that was proposed by Stantec and discussed by the campeones. One aspect that the campeones really advocated for was more native plantings after learning about the importance of native plants. So we've incorporated that into the design with this vegetated filter strip that you see, which they now know is going to provide benefits to water quality by filtering out some of the finer sediments that pass through the previous steps in the green infrastructure best management practice seen here. But then they also expressed the aesthetic value of something like this in their own neighborhood, and kind of imagined this area as a place that families could spend time in, especially along this public use trail that we've developed. So it was really special to kind of work together on this project and allow people who live or have lived on the street to be able to give opinions on what makes the most sense for their community. So we've done a lot in the 2 years of this cohort. One of the fun things we did was a green infrastructure tour along the Woonasquatucket River Greenway. So on the left, you see me and some cohort members up at Preferred Equipment in Johnston. It's a really, really large parking lot. It's also where we keep our WRWC vehicles. So all of the River Ranger trucks are up there. We worked with the property owner to depave a pretty large section of this parking lot that was not being used and replace it with trees and a rain garden. We're also working to develop a stream bank restoration project right along here at Manton Dam. But what you see in this photo is us giving an example of some natural infrastructure that is possible even when you don't have a lot of room to do depaving. So what I'm standing in front of are these rain boxes that we've built with Building Futures, which has been a really amazing partnership for us as well. So these rain boxes are connected directly to the downspout of the roof of the building, which is quite a massive building. So you can't see it because it's winter in this photo, but we plant native plants in these rain boxes that are able to absorb and uptake a lot of the stormwater from that roof. So rather than all of the contaminants from the roof and the parking lot draining directly into the river, they are now being absorbed by native plants. And the campeones were really interested in this idea. And so we're working to kind of find properties in the area that are interested in having a rain box on their property. So it's been interesting to see the kind of green infrastructure projects we're able to do in Providence in really, really densely populated urban areas that don't have a lot of space for depaving, especially since parking is always an issue around here. So we're finding kind of creative ways to implement natural infrastructure when possible. And another really fun thing we did was a rain barrel workshop. So this was a great example in which we were able to teach the cohort about quote unquote green infrastructure that doesn't involve plants. So in this case, the rain barrels are kind of mimicking nature and that they are slowing the flow of stormwater to kind of help reduce flooding in our neighborhoods. But it was a great activity that involved their families and will be installed in their homes. So yeah, everybody's looking forward to ways to advocate for these types of kind of easy but creative solutions in their neighborhood to kind of take the pressure off of our already overwhelmed stormwater and sewer systems here in Providence. So this year we graduated the first cohort of Campeones after 2 years in the program. So that was really exciting. And at our graduation, each participant expressed ways that they hope to continue being involved in advocating for green infrastructure in their communities. And so this is just kind of a short list of some of the things that graduates have done since completing Nuevas Voces and or Campeones. One thing that I'm always impressed with is how dedicated our graduates are to the planting and stewardship of trees and community gardens in their neighborhoods. Especially as I mentioned before, one thing that's really struck with me is like the cultural aspect of planting. People feel more connected with where they live when they are able to literally get their hands dirty and plant and cultivate food, herbs, flowers, whatever it may be. And so a lot of our graduates have been really involved in the creation of the Providence Tree Plan, as well as Providence Neighborhood Plantings Program currently has an initiative to create an urban fruit orchard. So many of our graduates have been attending meetings and deciding where that might be best placed in the community. Additionally, they worked together on a project to develop a pollinator garden in Denigian Park. So they were involved in selecting the site of the pollinator garden, selecting the plants, and then they're still actively stewarding that garden by watering it and maintaining the plants. Additionally, many of them are revitalizing a somewhat abandoned community garden right by William DeBate Elementary School. And so they are attending meetings, doing outreach to their neighbors to get them involved in the community garden and helping to revitalize that space. Many of them participated in the Urban Growers Leadership Program, in which they learned a lot about the resources and access to farmable land in our state. And then additionally, many of them have been involved in other neighborhood associations, such as Olneyville Neighborhood Association or One Neighborhood Builders Resident Advisory Committee, which are not inherently environmental organizations, but we know that our graduates come out of these programs with kind of an environmentally minded perspective. And so it's equally important that they take that advocacy to other groups and work to organize their community to provide more green spaces. And looking forward, we know that there's going to be a lot of urban forestry initiatives happening in the next few years. And so it's really great that because of the past 4+ years of work in the community, we have this network of residents who's really ready and excited and educated on this topic. And we know that they will go on to be stewards of this new urban forest that we're working to create here in Providence. So we're really excited about that. Here's just some photos of some other ways that the Campeones have been involved. So on the left, that was during a cleanup event in Denigian Park in October, in which we planted over 2,000 bulbs that will be flowering in the spring. So they were really excited about that. The photo on the right is the pollinator garden that I previously mentioned that was developed in collaboration with the Campeones cohort. And so they collaborated on choosing the site, designing the beds, choosing the plants. And as I said, they are currently active in watering and maintaining those plants. And then on the middle is a good example of some ways that they're working to cultivate resilience, not just by implementing natural infrastructure. So we're working in collaboration with the Coastal Resources Center, with Pam Rubinoff to pilot an upland flooding tool in Spanish on the My Coast app for folks to document flooding in their neighborhoods to give us better data to advocate for decision makers and really demonstrate where the problem areas are that need to be a priority for natural infrastructure going forward. So this is all to say that we're working really hard to try to make sure that people have a say in what happens to their neighborhoods, that they are able to articulate why they need to advance tree equity in our city, to be able to address some of these environmental injustices by making sure that they have access to cleaner air, cleaner water, green spaces for their families to enjoy, and all of those benefits that we know that trees can provide. And so, yeah, I know this was probably a little bit different than the type of presentation you guys have, but I think I'm really proud that our community programs has kind of been able to serve as a model for community engagement. And so it's something to consider as you look for volunteers, look for people to kind of steward these areas, and to think about the cultural impacts and best practices in engaging with the community. So yeah, that's all. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Haley and David, for the terrific presentation. Really welcome, having the opportunity to, learn in some depth about the Nuevas Voces and Campeones, programs in particular, within the broader context of what the Watershed Council does. So this is a time for questions anyone may have. I've got a couple, but I'm gonna wait just a moment before give others a chance to jump in. Well, I'll start with one of them, and we'll see where it goes. But I'm guessing that I know that one of the things that you also do is as you're doing now, share news about what you're doing in this program with other audiences and at conferences and so forth. And I'm guessing that you're asked about the the transferability of this model to perhaps other cities, other types of ecosystems, within the woodlands, partnerships work. And I know there are also some lower if pockets of the state that fall in rural areas, for example. And if you have any thoughts or understandings that you've come to that you think have been key for the success of this program, and what you would suggest to others.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Something that I've really learned in working with the co-facilitators that have been around since the first cohort of Nuevas Voces is that it does take time to build relationships with the community. So in our first cohort, it was a much smaller. But if you, as David said, kind of meet people where they're at and provide the accommodations that they might need, we found that word of mouth has really allowed us to be really successful in recruiting new cohort members. So while we might have started in 2020 with a cohort of like maybe 6 to 7 people, this was the first year that we had to actually turn people away for the program. And so I think sometimes relationship building can take time. And this is a good example of that. And really, yeah, just meeting people where they're at. So realizing that people might not have a lot of time to expend on something that might not seem to affect the day-to-day material conditions of their lives, but to kind of find things that resonate with them, and that's going to look different in every community. But that's been really helpful in helping to identify people that really care about their environment.
Yeah, so all that being said, I would certainly say that this model can and should be replicated across many other communities, regardless of whether they are urban or rural, because the reality is that this level of exposure around environmental science, civic engagement, it can be applied anywhere. And those are universal skills that, again, regardless of one's background or which zip code they live in, they can use that to truly make a difference within themselves, but also within their immediate neighborhood. And I would just make the recommendation that naturally their level of presentation, the type of curriculum that they dive into is going to vary based on geography, because the experts that you have immediate access to are going to differ. We're very blessed to be able to have connections with the University of Rhode Island, with the Department of Environmental Management, with climate-oriented advocacy groups that we could tap into whenever we need additional support or we want to focus on a specific topic.
Thanks for sharing those perspectives. So, any others, feel free to jump in here. But I'll ask one more. That is, so as a, when I was talking with you, was talking about how how the Woodland Partnership is trying to do more on urban communities and urban forestry and greening, so forth. I was talking about some of the places where we've been on field trips and past presentations. In this sort of an open question might also be one to think about. But is there anything that the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership could do in this area? We don't really have resources to undertake a community tree planting project, but we have partners who do. The neighborhood planting program, for example, is a partner. We've had this city parks involved. We tend to sort of bring attention to places or environmental issues relevant to trees and woodlands through a presentation like this, a field trip, or sometimes we can kind of try to convene folks around a particular topic or issue. So that's something I'd wonder about too.
Absolutely, Chris. I think that is the strength of partnerships. I think any references that could be made to organizations that would be willing to offer a site visit to either their facility or some of the urban tree planting that they've been doing across different neighborhoods, like that is the type of exposure we want to demonstrate to our participants, because it goes back to this idea that these green infrastructure investments, when it comes to urban forestry, that is actively happening in our backyard. But again, we otherwise wouldn't know of it unless we have that connection to be able to leverage and be able to demonstrate to our students hands-on. So we would certainly welcome, again, any introductions, any connections, whether, again, it's a potential site visit or it's an upcoming opportunity that perhaps hasn't launched yet and they're still looking for community members to be a part of an advisory board or to also be a part of that ongoing effort. Those are the opportunities that we want to look at our current students and alumni and say, these are exciting opportunities. We know some of you in specific have made reference to wanting to get more involved around urban forestry. We want to make this connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with what David said. I think, yeah, as I said, a lot of our participants are looking for ways to get their hands dirty, so to speak, and be planting and stewarding trees. But other than that, I think any avenues to advocate for tree equity in our city will provide benefits to these communities facing these environmental justice problems as well.
Well, thanks for the suggestion. Yeah, I know you're developing some skilled you graduates, and especially some of those who make the commitment to go on through the Campiones program. So maybe opportunities to try to connect them with other roles that they might take on. Bob Verrier there, just I know we've been working on this suggestion for a something sort of focused on reuse of wood that comes from urban trees. Understand that Bob worked on some of the early arboriculture and tree service work along the Greenway. So we'll follow up on any leads on that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Bob.
I have a question. But first a comment. I have great admiration for the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council. At 63 years old, I went back to school, and it was my first year, spring semester, and everyone, all the students, were about to go out and do a summer internship. And I thought at 63 years old, I should have a summer internship. So I called your executive director, called Alicia, and I said, I want to be a summer intern. So I became a summer intern, and we did a pilot project on stormwater flow into the river, and we mapped everything, took pictures, and then a number of us went out and hacked away at downspouts and drainage and all kinds of things. I made $10 an hour, by the way. Couple of points. The work you do, I would love to replicate and learn more for our communities in the Great Northwest Territories up here. When my tenure there, I learned how to do a rain barrel workshop, and I brought that back up here. But the idea of a grassroots environmental curriculum for folks, oh my goodness, I would love to have access to some of your notes. Sorry, but yeah,
absolutely, Paul. Absolutely. I mean, any ideas that y'all have in terms of like being able to replicate a similar model, any notes, any lived experience that we can share? Absolutely. We got our syllabus right here that I'd be happy to be able to share with y'all, because again, this is something that did not happen overnight. And I know I emphasized that a lot during our presentation, is the quality of facilitation, the curriculum is a lot different today than it was in the fall of 2020. Some of obviously what we have discussed in terms of the base level knowledge we want our students to have around environmental justice has stayed the same, but the methodology on how we deliver it, the site visits, the hands-on opportunities, that's what's evolved. And so any way that we can share those models, like, please do not hesitate to reach out. I know we're all copied onto that email that Chris has organized. So please look for us and reach out, and we'd be happy to share our notes and talk.
Yeah, in that regards, Alicia came to one of our workshops here. Was called from oh my goodness. Anyway, doing a natural dye workshop, and we brought folks from Pawtucket, Central Falls up to the Great Woods here in the Great White North, and taught them about how to use natural dyes. The other question is more of a serious note, and that is I didn't realize some of your funding came from EPA, with the potential for some of that funding being challenged with the next administration, not to mention immigration status and a whole bunch of other issues. Are you concerned, or at what level are you concerned with the new administration coming in just a few days?
Absolutely. So we are actively adapting and looking at local partners such as Dorcas International and the Immigrant Coalition of Rhode Island that will be able to provide us with immediate access to resources, and most importantly, bust any potential myths or misinformation that goes out into the community. So right now we are taking it a day at a time. I've been in contact with the Immigration Coalition over the last several weeks to ensure that, as needed, if we see any immediate executive orders, any decisions that are made by the new administration, that we are actively prepared to have briefings with our participants.
Yeah.
And truth be told, like a few days after the November election, we had a really serious conversation with our participants, and we gave them the reassurance that we are still sticking through this program all the way up until June of 2025 when they graduate, and that was not going to change in any way, shape, or form. But in the meantime, if they needed access to any services or resources that pertained to social services or immigration, that we would be actively ready to reach out to our partners and make sure that we leveraged anyone that would be able to support them. In terms of funding, that is definitely an ongoing conversation I think a lot of nonprofits are having, and recognizing that we're going to have to depend a bit more on foundations and other institutional supporters that are likely going to do what we saw back in 2017, 2018, where a lot of them stepped up and said, hey, we recognize the federal government is chipping away at these programs, so we're going to increase our grant amounts. We're going to expand grant opportunities. So thankfully, we have a very thoughtful grant manager who always keeps our community programs in mind and is going to alert us anytime that we can expand funding going into future cohorts.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. And it's a great program. It really is. I've been the beneficiary of some of that knowledge and information when I was an intern there. So it has seen a much different approach with you too. So congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And yeah, luckily a lot of the grants that are currently funding our community programs are funding 2 years worth of cohorts. So we're lucky that we have some sort of sustained funding on that part. But also I want to give a shout out to you, Paul, as well, because when I was planning the rain barrel workshop for the Campeones, Alicia showed me your videos. So they were very helpful.
Yeah, they're great. A lot of fun. That was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Or anyone else?
My God, I can talk to you. I can talk to you guys for all day, for goodness sakes. No other questions? Wow.
Well, this has been really fun, everyone. Like, I again cannot tell y'all enough how much we appreciate the last hour. Thank you for taking the time out of this meeting in particular, just to be able to learn a little more about the work that we do. And please, we emphasize that if you have any thoughts or ideas of potential site visits for our participants, if you know of any organizations that are actively seeking board members, advisory members, community members with lived experience, especially those that come from the Latino community, do not hesitate to reach out. Right now, we're in the process of planning out our involvement fair for April. So we are seeking out any additional partners that may want to be a part of it. Naturally, one thing we do ask for is that there be Spanish-speaking accommodations for any of these programs. Because we want to ensure that whatever program we make a reference to for our participants, that they don't go in there feeling like we just let go of the entire safety net and now they're on their own. So being able to have those smaller level of services can go a really long way. But please don't hesitate to reach out. Haley is just put into the chat as well, our emails. So we really look forward to being able to stay in touch. I know I've made a reference to this current cohort. So we're going to be graduating in June, which is coming up relatively soon before we know it. And the goal is that we'll be launching the 5th cohort going into fall of this year. So similarly, if you think there is a lesson, a site visit that we can incorporate going into our next cohort as well, do not hesitate to reach out.
Well, thanks so much to both of you for taking the time and putting all the energy into the presentation. I will be following up with you guys later, seeing if anyone from the Watershed Council, or the Nuevas Voces or Campeones participants, might like to join the Woodland Partnership email list. It's pretty simple, but are always looking to keep folks in the loop that way. So thank you so much, and you are welcome to stick around for the rest of the meeting. We'll understand that you have plenty of work to do, and may need or want to go and do that.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Guys. Yeah, I'll stick around. David's a busy guy, but
Brett Morales, if you want to hear our policy updates.
Please, I do. Okay, if you want to send me an email, we could schedule a time.
Sure, absolutely. We're gonna run through them real quick right now, though. If you got 5 seconds.
Oh yeah. All ears.
That's next up. So let's go there.
So just for context, the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership is made up of a bunch of different partners who work on legislative issues. We don't generally as a collective weigh in legislatively, but we do these updates once a month to sort of see what the landscape is for our forestry community and what people are working on this year. Bob, I would love to lead off with anything that's any updates related to forest parity, which is taking and applying basically the same rules that farms benefit from to woods operators.
Sure, go ahead. It's drafted in the House and going through a draft in the Senate right now for this year.
Will Rep Cotter be who's the lead? Do you know?
Yeah, she's the lead with Mike Chippendale second on the House side, and Jake Basilians heading it up on the Senate side. We've got a lot of strong votes on the Senate side as well so far in favor of.
Yeah,
Bob, I just wanted to ask if if there are any changes or potential changes to the bill, this year, just in following up on some of the lessons or experience that you all might have gained last year, and in trying to help it sort of navigate the process.
Basically, same bill as last year. It passed the House unanimously. Just didn't have a companion bill, which this year it does.
Okay.
And like I said, we've got strong will for the from the Senate side right now to push it through.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for that update. So I am just going to give an update. Generally, we know that the green bond passed. There's money in the green bond to do forest management work on state lands, funding to provide matching funds for conservation works in forest lands. That's all very good. The budget drops today at 4, and we'll all be combing that budget to see what else is in store in terms of how many employees DEM is going to get, full-time equivalents in wetlands regulations and DFE and all of that. So a little under 2 hours. I'm sure lots of people will furiously be reading the giant budget. In terms of what the Land Trust Council is working on, our primary bill was our primary focus of last year besides the bond, which is emphasizing the intersection between affordable housing and land conservation through the Housing and Conservation Trust Fund. We had a lot of really good energy behind this bill last year. We have good sponsors. Senator Basilian on the Senate side is now the chair of Housing and Municipal Government, so perfect. And June Speakman is the lead on this. On the House side, essentially, for those that don't know, this works to appoint a committee, a broad committee, to make decisions on both affordable housing and land conservation together. There is a fund attached to that. We are not seeking funding at this time in a year with a giant budget deficit. I think it's more important that we get those 11 appointments so that we can start working together. And in the last 2 years, there's been a lot of good energy between community developers and affordable housing and conservation, recognizing that we have a lot more in common than we often think that we do, and that we can go a lot farther by working together. So that's what we're working on. We are hearing that there will be 2 old growth natural heritage preserve related bills. I know that the Old Growth Tree Society will probably introduce some version that we've seen in the last couple of years of that old growth bill. And also there's a solar siting bill that is being introduced, which basically takes what we got through 2 years ago one step further to prevent solar development in old growth forests and natural heritage areas. Don't really know what the ins and outs of that are quite yet. Nothing's been introduced, but there was a draft that was floated around last week. And yeah, staffing levels, DEN, that's sort of like what we're kind of playing defense or looking at, as well as just anything else that comes down the pike related to forests. Any other partners have policy updates or want to bring any attention to any policy related areas?
Well, I know just a question, but especially since we're talking about urban green infrastructure today, and also we have shoreline forests in Rhode Island, or it's important to keep those around, and for people to know about them and be able to access them. I just thought I'd ask about the shoreline access policy. I know there is a lot of action on that in the last couple of years. If that's kind of stay, anticipated to stay as it is for a while, or will there be more activity on that front to try to increase it further, or perhaps from some constituents who aren't so wild about it.
Rep, I don't know if you want to take this, but the law stands 10 feet above the rack line, so the seaweed line people have access to. However, there have been 2 to 3 legal challenges, so I don't actually know. I haven't checked in on the current status of where those are. There are shoreline homeowners that are challenging that rule currently. It's in the courts.
Yeah, and that was expected when we passed
Yeah.
the law. Even after the study commission process, we recognized that lawsuits were going to be incoming as soon as the governor signed it. And that's what we've seen firsthand. I don't think it changes anything in regards to what the actual legal standing is going to be. I'd be very surprised, though I've heard rumblings, but haven't seen any legislation introduced in contrast to repeal it or roll back any of those efforts. I know it was somewhat whispered towards the end of last session, but going into this session, I haven't heard any rumblings of that coming back, which is a positive sign. And I think at this point in time, when you look at House and Senate leadership, they'll probably just lean towards, we'll see how the courts play out with it. But again, it's pretty straightforward now that we finally have this codified into law.
Thank you. I know that we got a continuing resolution on the federal budget, which means there was a continuing resolution on the Farm Bill. That does not mean everyone's negotiated the Farm Bill and has come to a resolution on passing the next version of the budget. So I think that we all are still waiting to figure out what shakes out with some of the federal funding related to the conservation, forestry, U.S. Forest Service work that we do, which is just delightful as we head into Tuesday. I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll see what happens.
Sounds like Congress. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kate, on that note, I heard that the RCPP program funding is either being cut or dead for 2025. So the current folks who are in and ready to be funded are okay, but the next round is the funds are unavailable. Is that true?
Melissa, you're here. Do you know anything about that?
I'm here. We're like one day at a time here. I have not heard that.
Yeah.
I don't think anything is final at this point. I think next week these rumors that we're hearing will start to become formal and final. At this point, that's probably a rumor that may happen, but nothing yet that we can say for sure.
Paul,
I hope not.
As I
I'll
understand
bank
it,
on that.
any of the RCPP agreements that we have in place will stand. That money has been allocated. So anyone who has an application in the pipeline for a forest conservation easement, that's like there's money that is in a pot for that we have here. I imagine what I'm understanding is that any future applications for these large state or regional RCPPs might not have funding attached.
Anything that's obligated currently is safe. It's
Cool.
just any future funding or funds that we may actually have in-house at NRCS even that haven't been obligated yet could get pulled. But if you have an existing contract, you are all set.
Okay, thanks.
I do know that there was a fast attempt nationwide to try to figure out how to get those contracts out. So hopefully we figured out to the best of our ability that trick here.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps as we segue into more general updates and announcements, since the Woodland Partnership is a partner in the Rhode Island Forest Health Works RCPP, just for those of you who are involved with that, we've appreciated you keeping us up to date on things, but where things are with that at present.
Melissa or Sam, do you know? So I'm totally out of the loop now. But for David and Haley, we wrote a giant grant several years ago that funds forest conservation easements and protections on private lands either held by entities like Land Trust or the U.S. government. So It's been really successful. We've been able to get a lot of applications and for people who are interested in conserving their forests. But I don't know the update. Anyone?
I can give a quick update. So we are moving forward with 4 US held easements, which is wonderful. And those, nothing's happening to those despite the rumors going around because those have been fully obligated. So those are gonna go forward. We're thinking we could probably fund 2 more of the US held easements. Yeah, assuming that the funding stays available. And then for entity held easements, like those held by land trusts, I think we have 5 or 6, and we
Oh, cool.
still have, yeah, and that could be about it. We might have more funding, but that's where we are right now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's that estimated at acreage? What, like 600-700, something like that?
So for US held, the goal is 700, and we are not there, sadly. If we were able to fund everyone that applied, it would be out of this world how many acres we have because there's so much interest. But yeah, I don't have the number right now. But
what happened, Haley? Is everybody okay? You guys don't have to stick around. We're just doing updates. Policy stuff is pretty much wrapped up. If you want to feel like you can back out, that's totally okay at this point. Thank you again for attending. I don't know what's going on with your computer. But yeah, are we switching to general updates?
Yeah, I think this is a good time to sort of shift into more general updates. I'll share one just in one of the other hats they wear is being an officer for the Yankee division of the Society of American Foresters. We're having our annual meeting on Friday, February 7th in Sturbridge, Mass, with a program that includes we'll have a speaker talking about the regional economic outlook for forestry and wood products. Actually, well, also hearing from Green Development based here in Rhode Island. They're building a biochar plant, I understand, in the Quonset. And so we're going to learn about that. It'll be, well, that will be news to me. And then updates on forest health topics from biologists at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station that are relevant to the whole Connecticut, Mass, Rhode Island region. Hemlock woolly adelgid in beech leaf disease in particular, since they're experts on that. And I'm sure we'll be hearing about southern pine beetle and other topics as well. So I may throw a link into the chat, or if you're maybe interested, you don't have the information already, feel free to reach out. Thanks. I think somebody's got some background noise that we're hearing here. So if that might be coming from you, if you're able to mute.
Hey, Chris, I can give you an update on Rhode Island Wood Operators. We were able to raise this year, as we did last year for Hasbro Children's Hospital through Log a Load for Kids. We ended up raising another record-breaking $40,363, which we're going to present to Hasbro tomorrow.
That's awesome.
Great job.
If everybody partners together next year, we could break 100,000.
Well, thanks for you continuing to spread the word around as you do. Any more updates? Paul from RC&D? I know you.
Yes, RC&D has got a slew of workshops coming up. If you don't get our newsletter, please send me an email and I can put you on our mailing list. We have a winter birding in Rhode Island, which will be Saturday, January 25th. We have winter wildlife for Rhode Island and fisher cat populations. That'd be Tuesday, February 25th. We have Scott Rabideau talking about Rhode Island wetlands. And that's March 19th. And then we have a big speaker coming in. Doug Tallamy is going to be talking virtually with us, a guide to restoring the little things that run the world. So we'll be advertising that fairly wise. So, with our newsletter, but also through Kate and the Wild Plant Society. And once again, one of the Woodland Partnership programs, Forestry for the Birds. We're doing a presentation in Scituate on that on April 25th. And we have insect and diseases. We have a virtual workshop on that on Monday, May 12th. So we have a lot of workshops, almost one per month, just as an outreach program. So if you're interested, you can contact me, get on our newsletter, sign up for these newsletters. The one with Doug Tallamy would be a QR code. It's going to be a webinar. We can't physically handle that type of people signing up through this office. So we'll have it on the webinar. So any questions? Or should I put down my email in the chat?
I put the link to the flyer, Paul, in the chat. So it's up there. Your contact should be in there.
Thank you very much, Kate.
Christopher, I've got another update you might want to hear about as far as the BMP manuals are.
Go ahead. Sure.
So tentatively, we're going to have a workshop through RIFCO for the wood operators and landowners tentatively on March 13th, which is a Thursday. We're just not sure of the location as of yet. It's probably a 4-hour workshop, one CEU credit for Connecticut loggers.
Great.
Well, you mind if I advertise that to the land trust folks, Bob? I don't know how big the space will be.
No, fine. Go ahead.
Okay.
Much appreciated.
Hey, just to suggest you check in with the DEM forestry folks on the, just check in on how that's going through the process there.
Do you mean the process of the BMP manual? Do you want an update on that?
That's what I was getting at.
Okay, we are almost completed. We're going over the last hurdle, which is basically ironing out little term and wording things with Office of Compliance and Inspection. This is the last step. That is supposed to be completed tomorrow, close of business. We're sending them the edited version. If they okay it, we will have basically the final manual to go to the designer to finish it. We're getting quotes for printing now. We do not know when they will be printed. We are hoping in February or March, but printing can take a while. But the manual itself will be finished, as, if not by the end of this month, then very early February.
Well, that's encouraging. I wasn't sure where things were with that process. So great news. Anyone else?
Yes, if I can give an update. Some of you may know I teach a class at Bryant University on energy and sustainability. And some of you have received an email from someone at Bryant, from a Robert Mersad, to participate in this thing called an IDEA program. Please, it was my recommendation for some of you to take part in that program. So please take a look at it, see if it makes sense for you. And also the time is a little bit perhaps challenging, but take a look at it. I took part in it last year. It covered areas from oceans to land preservation, forestry, wildlife conservation, and many, many more things that we're all interested in. So take a look, and just so you know where that came from, initially it came from me.
Sounds good.
I just want to share that the districts are holding local working group meetings coming up. So just for folks to be aware of, this is each district has meetings set up. So if you visit their website or the NRCS website, you can check out dates and locations for those. And it's an opportunity for anybody to come and voice opinions about sort of the direction to some extent of NRCS programs for this year. So those are going to be later this month and in February.
Thanks, Melissa. All right. Well, I think we're at the conclusion of this meeting. Thanks for your participation and for all the different updates that everyone's shared. Kate and I are still working on a topic for the February meeting, which might possibly be a date other than the third Thursday, since that falls during the February school vacation week, when some of us will be away. But we will be in touch about that. And as always, interested in ideas and suggestions for presentations and field trips. Had received some good ones after the last meeting. So thank you, and we will see you next time.
Thanks,
Okay, have a good
everybody.
afternoon.